go into blackout and wake up covered in cuts and bruises on a hospital trolley or in a police cell, full of shame and despair. He smeared the tears from his cheeks with the back of his hand, licked his sopping lips, and tried to focus on the street signs so he could work out where he was, but he didn't recognise any of the landmarks. So Dino was relieved to see a train station ahead of him. He looked up at the sign, squinting to force the words to stop vibrating, and saw where he was. Hockley, which was a village a few stops from Southend-on-Sea. He vaguely remembered getting on a train a few hours ago, because that's what he had to do now, just so he could get a drink. In Southend, it was becoming more and more difficult to find a pub or bar that would let him in. They all knew his face and refused to serve him, so he was forced to travel out of town. He had no idea what the time was. All he knew was that it was late, and he'd been on the piss all day, and he just wanted to get home and sleep. Dino prayed the trains were still running, but if they weren't, he'd find a bench to curl up on till morning. It wouldn't be the first time. Yeah, drink would be the death of him. Now his tears of frustration had dried in the chill of the night. He kind of knew he was on the escalator to hell. One day he'd drop dead of liver failure or a heart attack, or more likely he'd pick a fight with some guy who was bigger than him, quicker, stronger, more sober. All these years later, he was still trying to live with the guilt of what he'd done. If he didn't do something about it, the knowledge would eat away at him like a cancer. Sometimes Dino wished those others had called the police on him. He'd be paying the price. In prison right now, lying on his bunk after lights out, listening to the wails and night terrors of the other cons, 3 years into a 20-year stretch. But a life banged up had to be better than what he had right now, which was a living hell. Because she was the first thing he thought about when he woke up every morning, and the last thing on his mind before he drifted into a sleep filled with nightmares. And Dino's drinking was getting worse. He was getting obliterated every night in an attempt to blot out what had happened. What he did. Sure, he had a temper when he was sober, but if he hadn't been drinking, he'd never have done any of the stupid things he had on his conscience. It was the booze that made him attack that random guy in the street all those years ago. It was the drink that made his ex call the police on him. And it was what finally made him a murderer. Deep down, he understood that he picked fights with strangers in pubs because he had a death wish. He knew that one day he could be felled by a single sickening punch. He may not even see it coming, and then it would all be over. He was sick of himself. He was tired of being Andrew Dean. So, as he approached the station entrance, Dino came to a decision. He was going to go to the police and confess what he did, and where they could find the body. And finally, all these years later, he would face the consequences of his actions. He'd be punished, locked up for years and years, but at least he could get help for his drinking and depression. That's what he was going to do. He was going to confess. And maybe one day, when he was released, he'd finally be able to turn his life around. It's true that there'd been many times like this, when drunk and depressed he had convinced himself that he was going to turn himself in, but then the next morning did nothing about it. But this time, Dino was determined. First thing tomorrow, or most likely when he dragged himself out of bed after lunch, he would go to the police station. And then it would all be over. Relief washed over him as he stood on the empty platform and wept again, racking sobs that made his chest heave so hard he could hardly catch his breath. Tears fell through his big hands, hands that had killed, and onto the floor. But when he looked up, the sobs still catching in his throat, he saw that he wasn't alone. Someone was watching him from the shadows. "What are you looking at?" Embarrassed at being caught crying, his anger returned. "Piss off!" Dino turned away, determined to ignore them. He wasn't going to let anyone wind him up, not now he had come to a decision. But when he looked back, the figure was still there, standing in the darkness beneath the platform roof. All he could see was their glinting, watchful eyes.